So on slide number 4, you can see our introductory slide with our website, greensciencepolicy.org, and I encourage you to go there. There's a lot more information about all the things I'll be talking about. In slide number 5, where are flame retardants used? They're used in electronics, inside the electronics where it gets hot and is important, perhaps not as importantly in electronic cases. They're used in building insulation, in polyurethane foam, and in wire and cable. And why are they there? In slide 6, they're used to meet flammability standards. And a lot of these standards were first started a long time ago in the 70s. There was, in those days, a flammability standard for baby pajamas, a furniture flammability standard in California that has become a standard across the U.S., and a standard for foam plastic insulation. And in the 70s, when these standards were first promulgated, people didn't really check to see if there was a fire safety benefit as thoroughly as they might have. It sounded like a good thing to add flame retardants. And they also didn't check to see if there was going to be any sort of health or environmental harm from the chemicals that were used to meet these standards. And the story we will be telling is, in many cases, there is not a proven fire safety benefit, and there is serious long-term harm to our population and our environment. So my interest in flame retardants began a long time ago, back in the 70s. In slide 7, I had heard about the poisoning of Michigan, and indeed the book that we recommend this week. There's always a recommended book down at the bottom of your messages, and this week we recommend The Poisoning of Michigan by Joyce Egginton, which describes how in the early 70s a bag of flame retardants was substituted for animal food inadvertently in Michigan, leading to the poisoning and deaths of literally millions of animals and the exposure of the citizens of Michigan to flame retardants. I had heard about that, and then Bruce Ames, a professor in Berkeley who was on my orals committee when I was a student there, said he was really worried about the flame retardants in children's pajamas, and could I take a look. At the time I was postdocing at Stanford, but wanting to do something that could help human health or the global environment. So I said, sure, I'd look at flame retardants in pajamas. And first we found a child who had not worn tris-treated pajamas. The flame retardant was called brominated tris. And so her mom changed, so she was wearing flame retardant pajamas, and immediately brominated tris metabolites showed up in the child's urine. So it looked like this flame retardant was getting into children. And then we ran a mutagenicity screening. That means, does the flame retardant change DNA? And it turned out that this flame retardant brominated tris was a very strong mutagen. It did change DNA, which meant it could be associated with cancer. So being scientists, we wrote a paper, as in slide 8. And this is an unusual paper, because if most of you perhaps have read scientific papers, and you know that most scientific papers end with a recommendation for more study. And this paper in the subtitle says, the main flame retardant in children's pajamas is a mutagen and should not be used. It was a lead article in Science. It had a lot of impact. And what we do now at the Green Science Policy Institute is we encourage scientists and science students to take their research, spread the results to the public and decision makers, so that all our scientific research can be used in support of the public good, of public health, and a safer environment. So back in January 1977, we had a lead article in Science, and then 3 months later, in slide 9, the Consumer Product Safety Commission banned brominated tris from children's garments, and a whole generation of kids were not exposed. It was only used for a couple of years. But when a chemical is banned, there's a tendency to replace it with another chemical that's as similar as possible. And so when brominated tris was banned, the replacement was chlorinated tris. We ran more screens to see if it changed DNA, and it did. It was a mild mutagen, not as strong as brominated tris, but we wrote another paper in Science, and chlorinated tris was removed from pajamas back in 1978. However, chlorinated tris continued to be used in furniture and baby products until it was listed by the state of California as cancer-causing in 2012. And indeed, for some years, it was the major flame retardant used in furniture. So if any of you have a couch you purchased between about 2006 and 2012, there's probably a more than 50% chance your couch will be about 5% chlorinated tris in the foam. So if you have 20 pounds of foam in your couch, you might have a pound of chlorinated tris in your home. So why do we have chlorinated tris in our furniture? If we go to slide 10, the reason is a California standard called Technical Bulletin 117. As I mentioned previously, it was passed in the early 70s, and this standard requires the filling inside furniture to withstand a small open flame for 12 seconds. Now, is this a good standard? Well, if you do a thought experiment and you imagine a candle dropping on your couch, what burns first? The fabric will burn first, and when the fabric burns, you have a large flame. So the foam will actually now ignite in perhaps 1 or 2 seconds. When things burn, they often produce carbon dioxide and water, which are relatively harmless, but when things with halogens, like halogenated flame retardants, burn, they produce an increased amount of soot, smoke, and carbon monoxide. So when you add your flame retardant, you might get a couple seconds delay in ignition, but more toxic gases, and the time other measures like the total heat given off, the time to maximum heat release, are not changed. So there is really no significant fire safety benefit because fires do start in fabrics, not in fillings. So what are the flame retardants we've been using in our furniture? Well, from 1975 till 2004, the main flame retardant used to meet the California furniture standard is a chemical called penta. And I'm going to do one little chemistry lesson here. So if you look at those 4 chemical structures, the top one has 2 rings. These are called phenyl rings. And it's a biphenyl, and you put lots of chlorines around it, you get polychlorinated biphenyl, or PCB, which is a cancer-causing and harmful chemical. Instead of that little line between the 2 rings, which is a covalent bond, you have an oxygen, as in the structure below. It's called an ether. And if you have bromines around your 2 rings, you have a polybrominated biphenyl ether, and that is a PBDE. If you burn or oxidize that structure, add another oxygen, look down at the 3rd structure, you have a dioxin. And these are, again, cancer-causing, persistent, and extremely harmful. So the chemical that was used in furniture for most of the years till 2004 at levels of perhaps 5% is halfway between a dioxin and a PCB. And it's a sort of chemical that in a chemistry lab you would only use in a fume hood with full protective gear, but yet it is in furniture purchased from between those years. It will be in most of the furniture in California and a lesser amount outside California. And this chemical, penta-BDE, that means there are 5 bromines, is one of only 22 chemicals that have been globally banned by more than 150 countries as persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic. So penta, what do we know about health effects? Well, in terms of animal health effects, there are long-term or chronic impacts, endocrine disruption, neurodevelopmental problems, reproductive system effects, immune suppression, and cancer. And this is extremely well documented. At the end of last year, there were more than 4,000 scientific articles about PBDs. Some are about analytic techniques, but most are about accumulation in animals, humans, and the environment and health harm. And indeed, currently the total number is 4,500. So what are the human health effects? In slide 14, we see that when pregnant women have high levels in their body, it takes them a long time to become pregnant. They have altered thyroid hormones, and during critical windows of brain development, the fetus can develop, so it has long-term neurological effects relating to learning and development, such as hyperactivity, impaired attention, poorer coordination, and the fetus has lower birth weight. So these have been fairly well established. There are a number of IQ studies that indicate many children will have 4 to 6 points less permanent IQ because of the penta-BDE. So how are we exposed? In slide 15, the chemicals are called semi-volatile. They're continuously coming out of products such as furniture, going into dust. Toddlers crawl in the dust, get the chemicals on their hands, put them in their mouths. We have some on our hands. We eat food. Cats have a level 10 to 100 times higher than humans because of their grooming behavior. Toddlers in slide 16 have about 3 times the flame retardant levels of their mothers. They get the first dose through the placenta, a second from breast milk, and third from house dust. So the problem in slide 17 is most chemicals are not effectively regulated in the United States. The Toxics Control Act of 1976 grandfathered 62,000 chemicals, and even asbestos, which kills thousands every year, could not be regulated by the EPA. It's regulated through lawsuits, but by that point, the harm has been done. New chemicals are not required to have health data, and the majority have no data at all. So the slide 18 talks about regrettable substitutions. On the left, kids' PJs had brominated tris. It's a mutagen. It was replaced by chlorinated tris, also a mutagen. On the right, our furniture had penta-BDE. That's toxic, persistent, and bioaccumulative. It was replaced by chlorinated tris, and that's been shown to be a likely human carcinogen, but the replacements are Firemaster and phosphates. Firemaster is, I think, the main flame retardant currently being used. The manufacturers do not give samples for scientists to study, but one sample was studied by Heather Stapleton at Duke, who found when mama rats were fed Firemaster, the babies were quite obese and anxious. So it could be correlated with obesity and anxiety. It's just one small study. More study is needed. And phosphates are being studied by the National Toxicology Program and Biomonitor in California out of concern. They are found throughout the environment. There are associated hormonal changes and decreased sperm counts in men and some developmental and heart defects in zebrafish from phosphate flame retardants. So do we need them? In slide 19, flame retardants in furniture do not appreciably slow ignition, and they do cause health. Well, we were writing papers and talking about this for a long time, and not so much was happening, and then the Chicago Tribune did an excellent series, and I think the subtitle on slide 20, A Deceptive Campaign by Industry Brought Toxic Flame Retardants into Our Homes and into our bodies, and the chemicals don't even work as promised. I think this says it all, and you can Google Playing with Fire to read I think there were maybe 20 front-page stories about flame retardants and their industry, and this series won the Goldsmith Prize, was a finalist for the Pulitzer and the Environmental Journalist Award for reporting on the environment. So it's been a very well-received and influential series, and based on this series, Dick Durbin in Illinois and Barbara Boxer from California had hearings in the Senate, and the word really has been out about the harm and lack of benefit of these chemicals that are in almost all Americans' bodies. So the good news on slide 21 is since the Tribune, there have been some important policy actions. California passed a new furniture flammability standard. It will be starting January 1st. It is for the cover fabrics where fires actually start. It can be met without flame retardants it will increase fire safety. So it may seem counterintuitive, but there will be more fire safety without flame retardants in the nation's furniture. Look for the new label, TB117-2013. Also, California just passed an assembly bill to reevaluate flammability standards for building insulation so that flame retardants may not be required where they do not provide a fire safety benefit. The standard in the 60s, a standard was passed for furniture foam using flame retardants, but after that, a much more stringent test for flashover that requires thermal barriers, concrete or masonry over insulation was passed. And so by the time you have a thermal barrier over your flame-retarded insulation, it does not provide an additional benefit and indeed might just make the fire more toxic. So California Assembly Bill should start paving the way to reduce flame retardants in building insulation where there's not a value. Okay, what can we do in slide 2? If you go to Green Science Policy Consumers, you can read more, but to reduce dust in your house and exposure, vacuum, wet mop, and hand wash. Buy furniture with a label that says TB117-2013, but the new standard just says flame retardants aren't required to meet it. It does not say there won't be flame retardants, so you still need to ask for products without flame retardants. We ask you to support improved flammability standards and research into green chemistry. On November 25th, there's a premiere on HBO of an hour-and-a-half documentary, Toxicity, about stopping the use of these harmful and ineffective flame retardants in furniture and baby products. Take-home points: many flame retardants on the market are associated with adverse health effects. There's no evidence that the flame retardants in home furniture, baby products, and some other products improve fire safety, but they do widely contaminate food, water, soil, may end up in our food supply. So the use of these flame retardants can be reduced and fire safety maintained, or in some cases increased. So our follow-up questions: are flame retardants present in the products you manufacture, sell, or use? How necessary are they? What alternatives have you investigated? Would you be interested in continuing the discussion? And if so, you can contact Sam. And I would just like to thank the GSP team: Sam Buesner, Christine Jeanette, Eileen Kramer, Steve Naylor, Christine, Carolyn Clark, Erica. And with that, I would be very happy to have some questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Arlene. We have a lot of questions. I'd just like to let everyone on the line know that we have about 6 minutes until 11:30, but we're going to extend the Q&A for a little bit beyond that. So if you have to get off of the line, feel free, and those who can stay, please stay on. Our first question is from Heidi, and she asks, is labeling of flame retardants required?
No, labeling's not required, and it would be difficult because the flame retardants used in a specific product are always changing. On the other hand, if things have a TB117 label, they're very likely to contain flame retardants, but even then it's not always for sure.
Okay. I have a question from Carol asking, can I be tested for flame retardants in my blood?
Well, just in a scientific research project. NHANES at the CDC does test thousands of Americans, and we get overall results such that we know with Penta that was used previously, Californians have about twice the level in their bodies as people outside California, but you just get kind of overall things from the population. Actually, I'll just say some good news that wasn't in my talk, is that, well, back when I started doing this work about 6 years ago, I had some of the highest levels ever measured in my dust, 97 parts per million. And after I got rid of all my Penta furniture, my dust level went down to 3 parts per million, and at that point I was tested and my body level was low. 4 years after getting rid of all the Penta furniture in my house. So I think the overall good news is that now that flame retardants will not be required, as people gradually replace their furniture without flame retardants, all of our body levels will go down.
That really is good news. David asks, if the foam is enclosed in a cover, can the flame retardant still escape and result in human exposure?
Yes. The chemicals are semi-volatile. They're continuously coming out into dust, and there is exposure. And in fact, in an early fact sheet, I thought, well, if the foam is covered in lots of layers, sometimes couches, they've got down and they've got muslin and it's far from the surface, it's safer. And the famous environmental engineer who studies this said that wasn't true, that even with all those layers, it's still coming out just as much.
Okay. Irina asks if there are flame retardants in pajamas today.
I'm pretty sure pajamas are fine. Cotton pajamas don't require them. Most children's pajamas are, if they're polyester, they don't flame. And as far as I know, the flame retardants that are used in a very small number of pajamas are not a problem. So I think pajamas are not a source of worry. Unfortunately, the chemicals that worried us in pajamas ended up in furniture, which is a source of worry.
Yes. Okay, I have another question from Jesse. Is there somewhere consumers can go to find products without flame retardants, especially children's products?
Well, again, we have some really good news. Starting January 1st, children's products are going to be exempt from flammability standards. In fact, 3 products, strollers, nursing pillows, and infant carriers were exempt a few years ago, and 17 more products will be exempt. So all except car seats, which a federal transportation requirement is going to continue for at least a while, keeping flame retardants in car seats. But otherwise, all baby products containing foam should no longer contain them, and you should be able to tell. You can't say for sure, but if there's no label saying it meets the California standard TB117, after January 1st, increasingly there should not be flame retardants. It's still a good idea to ask to make sure.
That does tie into another question from Barbara asking if anyone has studied the migration of flame retardants out of children's car seats.
Well, I don't know about car seats specifically, but it's certainly been studied out of couches and other products. And in terms of children, there's a disquieting study that the levels on their hands can be related to the levels in their bodies. So the chemicals do go from products to dust to hands to bodies.
Mm-hmm. I have a question from Karen about polymeric flame retardants. Are they safe, and do they move into our bodies?
Well, polymeric flame retardants are less likely to end up in our bodies if they're indeed all polymers. However, they are persistent, and their long-term behavior in the environment isn't known, and they're often made of toxic monomers. Monomer means one, polymer means many. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the life cycle, when they're manufactured, there is a problem, and then at the end of life, they can break down to the monomers. Most of the polymeric flame retardants are halogenated. They're organohalogens. And so if they burn, they will produce dioxins and furans. Mm-hmm. So I think more study is needed before they can be considered safer, as we really don't know their halogens, and they are persistent, which are definitely causes for concern.
Okay. I have a question from Katie asking, are there flame retardants present in my mattress?
Probably not. And again, this may seem a little counterintuitive, but mattresses have a 30-minute flammability standard. Furniture has a 12-second standard. So the flame retardants will stop a piece of foam, bare foam, from burning for 12 seconds. Maybe inside a couch, it's only 1 or 2 seconds. But with a mattress, they look at the full mattress, and it's a pretty severe flammability test for 30 minutes. So adding flame retardants really would not work unless you made your mattress half flame retardants, which wouldn't be very comfortable. So instead, the mattress is wrapped in a flame retardant barrier fabric. Sometimes it's a polymer, but there should not be added flame retardants in the foam. The mattress industry and the industry say they're not. We can't guarantee it because you never know about a specific piece of foam. But on average, mattresses should not contain flame retardants in foam, and I believe that most of them do not contain harmful flame retardants in the barriers.
Okay. I have a question from Joel asking, are there any safe flame retardant alternatives?
Well, some of the metal, aluminum hydroxide, magnesium hydroxide, some of those do not have harmful profiles as far as we know. The organohalogens and the phosphates are chemicals of concern, and any new flame retardant really needs to be studied, even if it's natural.
Okay, and then Cheryl asks, when does the new TB117 go into effect, and can flame retardants be removed from children's products now? And I know we already kind of covered that, but just to say again.
Okay, so the date, January 1st, 2014, manufacturers can start taking the flame retardants out, but that doesn't mean they're going to be out. There's some brands that only are using flame retardants in California and aren't using them outside California, and I think those brands will be in a position to very rapidly move non-flame retardant products into California. But other companies that I know very much want to get flame retardants out, it's going to take them a few months. So it's going to be a transition, and I think consumers need to look for the new label and then ask, and probably just best to wait a few more months. If you can postpone buying things, they're less likely to have flame retardants as time goes on.
Okay. And then one final question from Renee. Are there any effects of PBDEs that are transgenerational?
So that is a great question, and people are just starting to study that, and they are finding that in some animal studies. So we don't know for sure, but it's definitely a subject of concern, indeed, with not only PBDEs but other chemicals in the 6 classes. And in fact, it's a good transition into our next talk, which will be around endocrine disruptors, because most of these chemicals are endocrine disruptors, and many endocrine disruptors do have transgenerational effects. So I would say more study is needed, but something